morning. Welcome to another read aloud of who?
I was just going to say that's not the book.
Take two. Good morning. Welcome to another read aloud of Flush. We're joined by a couple of dogs. We've got dog one, dog other one, and we've got an oversized cup of coffee because we need energy today, obviously. So let's figure out what happens next in Flush. Chapter 4. The next morning, the lawyer stopped by our house. Mr. Shine looked about 1,000 years old, but Mom said he knew his way around the courthouse. She had hired him twice before to get my father out of trouble. Mr. Shine put his briefcase on the kitchen table and sat down. He looked mopey and gray, and his eyelids drooped. Abby said he reminded her of Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. My mother made a pot of coffee and began dropping hints that Abby and I should leave them alone. I'm trying. Abby grabbed a bagel out of the toaster and ran off to play on the computer. I got my spinning rod from the garage and biked up to the drawbridge at Snake Creek. The police won't let you fish from the top of the bridge because of the traffic, but you can go down underneath and cast from the sandbags in the shade. Sometimes, homeless people sleep under the bridge, but they usually don't bother anybody. The last time I'd been to Snake Creek, some woman in an army jacket had made a campsite high on the bank under the concrete braces. She even started a small fire, burning the wood slats from a broken stone crab trap. I gave her a nice mangrove snapper that I had caught, and she had it cleaned and cooked over the flame in 5 minutes. She said it was her best meal she'd eaten in a year. The next day, Abby and I went back with some homemade bread and a pound of fresh gulp shrimp, and the lady was gone. I never even got her name. One day, Mom was meeting with Mr. Shine. Nobody was under the bridge when I got there. On the day Mom was meeting with Mr. Shine, nobody was under the bridge when I got there. The tide was running in from the ocean, and schools of finger mullet were holding in the shine of the water behind the pilings. Every so often, they'd start jumping, trying to escape some bigger fish that was probably prowling it for lunch. I started casting a white bucktail, and in no time jumped a baby tarpon that wasn't even 10 pounds. Then I hooked something heavy, probably a snook, that ran out 100 feet and broke the line. As I was trying on another jig, I heard the outboard engine. It was a John boat, maybe 12 feet long, motoring along Snake Creek. 2 people were in the boat, and as it drew closer, I recognized them as Jasper Jr. and an older kid named Bull. They spotted me right away. I probably should have taken off, but I was really enjoying myself, fishing under that bridge. So, I set down my spinning rod and watched Jasper Jr. nose the John boat into the shallows. But Bull was in the boat. He climbed out first and looped a rope around one of the pilings. He's a hefty guy, but that's not how he got his name. People call him Bull because you can't believe a word he says. For instance, he told everyone at school that he was dropping out to play Double-A ball for the Baltimore Orioles. This is at age 16, right? We all knew that Bull couldn't catch a pop fly if it landed in his lap, so we weren't exactly surprised to see him bagging groceries that spring at the Winn-Dixie. After Bull tied the John boat, he called up to me. "Hey, buttface, better run for your life. Jasper's got a spear gun." "Yeah, right," I said. When Jasper Jr. hopped out of the boat, I saw that he didn't have a spear gun or any other weapon. Even so, running away would have been an excellent idea. I just didn't feel like it that day. Jasper Jr. walked up and asked, "What are you looking at?" "Absolutely nothing," I said with a straight face. "I told you I was going to find you, didn't I?" I knew that Jasper Jr. wasn't looking for me at Snake Creek. He and Bull were heading out to poach lobsters or pull some other mischief. But I played along. "Well, you found me. Now what?" That's when he socked me right in the eye, and it hurt too. Jasper Jr. seemed surprised I didn't fall down. And so was Bull. He said, "You got a hard head for a buttface." The way my cheekbone was throbbing, I figured that Jasper Jr.'s knuckles weren't feeling so good either. He was trying to act like a tough guy, but I noticed that his eyes were watering from the pain. I probably could have knocked him flat, but I decided not to. My father's a large man, very strong, but he says fighting is for people who can't win with their brains. He also says there are times when you've got no choice but to defend yourself from common morons. If Jasper Jr. had taken another swing at me, I definitely would have punched him back. Then Bull would have beat me to a pulp and the whole thing would have been over. But Jasper Jr. didn't hit me again. Instead, he spit in my face, which was worse in a way. He forced a laugh and called me a couple of dirty names and headed back towards the John boat. He was shaking his hand that he'd hit me with, as if there were a crab or a mousetrap attached to it, and Bull was following behind, crackling like a hyena. They got to the boat, and Jasper Jr. jerk-started the boat while Bull shoved out from the bow, or from the boat. Is it the bow or the bow? The bow of the boat? The bow of the boat. I pulled up the front of my shirt and wiped my spit off my face, and then I grabbed my fishing rod and took aim. The bucktail jig I had happened to be using weighted 1/4 of an ounce, which didn't sound like much until it thumped you between the shoulder blades, which is where I thumped Jasper Jr., and it was an awesome cast, I have to admit. The hook on the jig snagged firmly in the mesh of Jasper Jr.'s ratty old basketball jersey, and he let out a howl. I gave a stiff yank, and he howled again. In a panic, he twisted the throttle, and the John boat picked up speed, but that didn't help Jasper Jr. He was stuck on the end of my line like a moray eel. He hollered for Bull to cut him loose, which was all right with me. I'd made my point. Bull found a knife and clambered to the back of the boat, which turned out to be a humongous mistake. With so much weight in the stern, Bull, Jasper Jr., plus the engine, the bow, right? Okay. We'll call it the bow of the boat tilted upward, and the John boat began taking on water. No sooner had Bull reached behind Jasper Jr. to cut the fishing line than the motor gurgled to a dead stop. The blue-green water of Snake Creek was pouring in over the transom, and nobody in the John boat moved. Jasper Jr. was yelling at Bull, and Bull was yelling back, and they just kept getting water into the boat, making them wetter and wetter. By now, the motor was completely submerged, and the bow was pointed nearly straight up in the air, which meant that the boat was about to capsize. Bull was the first to jump, with Jasper Jr. right behind him. They started swimming like maniacs toward the bumpers of the bridge, cursing the whole way. They were making such an awful racket that the mullet scattered out of the eddies, and I knew that the fishing was pretty much shot for the afternoon. So I reeled in my line and made my way up the slope toward the highway. We have a pause in the story here. So, Jasper Jr. and Bull are obviously bullies and not very nice. But Noah casting his line and catching him did not seem like the best response to that. I know it probably felt good at the time, but I like what his dad said, that you can't win a fight. The only people who fight are people who can't use their brains to get out of a fight. Now you have to defend yourself sometimes, but you got to be able to use your brain and not get into a fight and not hook people with a fishing pole. At least that's my 2 cents. Alright, back to the story. You did what? Abby said when I told her what happened. Oh, you're just as whacked as Dad. I didn't sink their stupid boat. They sunk it themselves. Abby muttered in exasperation. If this keeps up, we're going to get run out of town. Mom will have to put the house up for sale. Jasper Jr. spit on me, I said. What happened to your eye? He did that too. He punched me. After examining my bruise, Abby seemed more sympathetic. From now on, don't go anywhere without Tom or Rado, she advised. It would have been a sensible plan, except that Tom's family was heading to North Carolina for the rest of the summer, and Rado, well, he was going camping in Colorado with his mother and stepdad. Tom and Rado were my best friends, and without them, I was basically on my own. Mom came into the bedroom, and the first thing she noticed, naturally, was my black eye. I told her the whole story. Abby hung around to make sure. My mother was real angry, but I begged her not to call Dusty Muleman and tell him what Jasper Jr. had done. It'll just make things worse, I said. What could be worse than getting punched and spit on? She asked. Lots of things. Trust me, Mom. Noah's right, Abby said. We'll discuss this later. My mother's mouth wasn't moving much when she talked, which meant she was still mad. Noah, please go wash up. There's a gentleman waiting in the living room to speak with you. Does anybody else's mom do that when she's upset? Like, she talks like this, like she wants to keep her mouth clenched because she's so angry? Yeah, I got my mom that angry a lot. Who is it, I asked. Is he from the police? No, he's from the newspaper, Mom said, making that sound even worse. Apparently, your father thought it would be a brilliant idea to have an article written about himself. He sent a reporter here to interview you. Abby rolled her eyes. You gotta be joking. I wish I were, said my mother. Hurry up, Noah, and put on a clean shirt, please. I don't want you looking like some sort of juvenile delinquent. Then you ought to put some makeup on this shiner, Abby suggested. No way, I said, no makeup. But it was too late. And there's a pause in the story here. Did you figure it out? Bow or bow? We're going to call it the bow. The bow of the boat. It sounds better. The reporter's name was Miles Umlaut. He was thin and blotchy, and his nose was scuffed up like an old shoe. Mom had stationed him on the sofa so he could set up his tape recorder on the coffee table. On his lap, he held a lined yellow pad that was covered with scribbles. I sat down in the tall armchair where my father usually sits. Mom had dabbed some flesh-colored powder around my black eye, and she must have done a good job because Miles Olmet didn't seem to notice. He asked what grade I was in, what sort of hobbies I enjoyed, and if I owned a dog or a cat, the usual stuff. He was pretending to be nice, but I could tell it was just a real chore for him. He was dying to get to the juicy parts. I understand you've been to visit your father, he said, finally. That must have been tough. Not really. I was trying to sound kind of cool, and bored. Yeah, well, this isn't the first time your dad's had a scrape with the law, is it? No, sir. What do you remember about the other times, he asked. I just shrugged. It was amazing that Mom had left me alone in the room with this guy. I knew she was hovering somewhere nearby, but at least for now I was free to say whatever I wanted. I found an old clipping about the Carmichael family, Miles Olmott said. He held up the photocopy to show me. Oh, that was a long time ago, I said. Well, only 3 years, actually. Are you sure? I asked. Oh, the 3 years sounded about right. Here's what had happened, the way my father told it anyway. The Carmichaels drove their 40-foot gas-hogging motorhome all the way to the Keys from someplace up in Michigan. They were too cheap to rent space at an RV park, so they parked along Highway 1 near the Indian Key Bridge and camped there for 3 nights, which would have been no big deal except for the way they treated their dogs. They had 2 chocolate labs, and they rode along with them in the motorhome. One morning, my dad was heading out on a harpoon fishing charter when he spotted Mr. Carmichael whipping the dogs with a bungee cord. Yikes. I guess the dogs had an accident inside the Winnebago or something. Anyhow, they were crying and yipping and trying to get away, but Mrs. Carmichael, who was the size of a whale, was standing on their leashes so that Mr. Carmichael could hit them with the cord. Oh, it's awful. When Dad saw that, he sort of freaked out. He beached the skiff right away, took out his harpoon gaff, and flattened every single tire, I think there was like 8 of them, on the Carmichael's RV. Then he put the 2 Labradors in his boat and went fishing. The sheriff's deputies were waiting on the dock at the end of the day. My father confessed right away, as he always does, but he wouldn't apologize. He also wouldn't say that he'd done what he'd done with the dogs because they knew they'd be safer anywhere other than with the Carmichaels. That time, Dad spent only 2 nights in jail before he let my mom bail him out. Eventually, he pleaded guilty to vandalism and I guess dog napping, although he agreed to pay for the Labradors and a new set of Winnebago tires. Later, we found out that Dad probably would have beaten the charges because the Carmichaels had refused to come back to the Keys for a trial. They wrote a letter to the judge saying that my father was a raving lunatic and that they were scared to be in the same country with him, which was ridiculous. Anyway, my dad said that running those puppy-whipping lowlifes out of the island was worth the illegal hassle. A public service is what he called it. The 2 chocolate labs ended up with some friends of ours, nice people who run an Italian restaurant down in Marathon. I listened while Miles Olmott went through the whole story again. Dad just lost his temper, I said. But those people were wrong. It's against the law to treat animals like that. Not only is it against the law, it's just plain flat out wrong. Why would you do that to a defenseless animal? That stuff bothers me too. Miles Olmott wrote that down on his pad, which made me a little nervous. So did the tiny green light blinking on his tape recorder. Dad just got to work on his self-control, I added. That's all. Are you ever afraid of him? I burst out laughing. It was such a lame question. Afraid of my dad? Are you serious? Well, no, you've got to admit, Miles Olmott said. His behavior has been erratic. Unpredictable, I mean. I knew perfectly well what erratic meant. Dad wouldn't hurt a flea, I said firmly. But would he hurt a human who would hurt a flea? That's when Mom breezed in to refill Miles Olmett's coffee cup, or at least that was her excuse anyway. How's it going, fellas? She asked. Just fine, Mrs. Underwood, said Miles Olmott. Noah's a bright young man. I felt like sticking my finger down my throat. My mom flashed her fake polite smile and said, Yes, we're very proud of him. She hung around for a while, making small talk, until the phone rang in the kitchen. As soon as we were alone again, Miles Olmert leaned forward and said, "Noah, what can you tell me about the incident with Derek Mays?" Not much. I was sure he already knew the whole story. Everybody in the Upper Keys did. And what he did know, he could have found out from the Coast Guard files. Derek says he was afraid for his life, Miles Olmert said. Maybe he was just afraid of getting busted. Here's what my dad said had happened. He was out bone fishing with two doctors from New Jersey when he spotted Derek Mays stringing a gill near Little Rabbit Key. Gill nets were outlawed years ago in Florida because they kill everything that gets tangled in them. Not just the bait fish, but sharks, reds, snook, tarpon, turtles, you name it, it dies. To make things worse, the island where Derek Mays was poaching was deep in the Everglades National Park, which is a totally protected area, or at least it's supposed to be. When he spotted my father, Derek hauled in the gill net and made a run for it. Dad's skiff is super quick, and it didn't take him long to catch up. Derek refused to stop, so my father leapt right into his boat. Then it turned into a wrestling match and things got ugly. By the time the park rangers arrived, Dad had wrapped up Derek in his own net like a big dumb mullet. But here's the part that really got to me. Not a darn thing happened to Derek because none of the rangers actually witnessed what he was doing at Little Rabbit. Meanwhile, Dad gets accused of assault, and the government takes away his captain's license because they said he's endangered the lives of his customers by chasing after Derek at high speeds. Of course, the two doctors on the boat said that they'd never had so much fun, but that didn't count for what the Coast Guard said. Which is why my father had to start driving a cab. Miles Olmert said, "There seems to be a pattern to these episodes, wouldn't you say?" "It's not like it happens every day," I said. The guy was definitely getting on my nerves. I was sort of annoyed at my father for choosing me to be the one for the interview. The only reason I knew was that Mom had refused to do it. "Let's talk about what happened to the Coral Queen," said Miles Olmert, and he droned through that whole story too. He told me that Dusty Muleman denied flushing polluted water from his gambling boat, which was no big surprise. Why would he ever admit to the crime? "He threatened to sue your father for slander," Miles Olmert said. "What's slander?" "Say something bad about a person that isn't true? That's slander." "Dad doesn't lie," I said. "He might do some crazy stuff, but he's always telling the truth. Always." "Are you proud of him, Noah?" That was a tricky one. I wasn't proud that my dad was sitting in jail, but I knew he was a good person. Even when he flies off the handle, at least he's fighting for something close to his heart. Too many people these days just turn their backs or close their eyes pretending everything's wonderful in the world. Well, it's not. I am proud of my father, I said to Miles Olmert, for standing up for what he believes in. But like I said, once in a while he goes too far. Miles Olmert jotted down every word. "Your dad said he considers himself a political prisoner. Would you agree with that?" Political prisoner? I thought. Give me a break. I knew Mom wasn't eavesdropping because she would have blown a fuse. "I don't know much about politics," I said carefully, but he's definitely a prisoner. Miles Olmert seemed to think that was pretty funny. He wrote it down, closed his notebook, and switched off his tape recorder. "Thank you, Noah. That was perfect," he said. Then he shook my hand and skidded out the front door. My mom was still on the phone in the kitchen. She gave me a thumbs-up signal when I came in to grab some cookies. On the way to my room, I stopped outside Abby's doorway and listened. She was crying, which got me worried because my sister hardly ever cries. I opened the door to check on her. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with a box of Kleenex on her lap, a pile of pink, crumpled-up tissues on the floor. I could tell she was really upset because she didn't even holler at me for barging in without knocking. "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's Mom," she sniffled. "But I just saw her. She seemed okay." Abby shook her head. "That lawyer? Shine?" She was trying to catch her breath between sobs. "What about him? He won't take Dad's case?" "Worse," Abby stammered. "I heard Mom ask him." Here, she paused to snatch another tissue and dab at her eyes. "Ask what?" I said impatiently. "She didn't know I was standing by the door." "Abby, it's all right. Calm down, okay?" "Okay." She straightened up, swallowed hard, and for a moment she looked like her old brave self. "Now tell me," I said, "what was Mom asking Mr. Shine about?" The D word," my sister whispered. "Divorce?" Abby nodded. Her lower lip began to tremble again, and her shoulders went kind of slack. So I sat on the bed and put one arm around her and tried to act stronger than I felt. Wow. So, a lot went on in this chapter. We're starting to really get to know the family a little bit better. Again, Noah and Abby have a really good relationship. They seem like pretty strong kids. They rely on each other. Seems like mom's pretty frustrated with dad. She's looking to possibly get a divorce, or maybe she's just so upset she's just exploring her options. Dad feels like he's a political prisoner, which means he feels like he's doing the right thing, but just getting caught doing the wrong part of it. You know, he sounds like he means well. You know, he's trying to stop people from doing things that are obviously wrong and harmful to other animals and other things. But the way he goes about it, I think, is a little too aggressive. So, we'll pick up next chapter and figure out what's going to happen. I'll see you then.